It happened quietly. That's what made it feel so final. Jenny didn't scream. She didn't sob. She didn't beg. She just looked Sumit in the eye and said, "I'm going back to America." Alone. Not for a short break, not to think things through. Permanently. And here's the shocker. She meant it. Not a threat, not a power play, and definitely not a storyline twist. No packing montage, no airport goodbye scenes. Just an emotional detonation dropped in the middle of a room where everyone thought she'd eventually fold again. She's leaving, and this time, she's not waiting for his permission. Welcome to Sister Wives Daily. I'm Sarah, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments, because today, we need to pick this apart. How do you go from devoting a decade of your life to a man in another country to walking away and not even blinking? Jenny's exit didn't begin with anger. It began with complete emotional depletion. You could see it in her face. This wasn't new pain. This was old pain finally refusing to stay quiet. And the moment aired without warning. No dramatic music build-up. No teaser from producers. 1 minute, they're filming what looks like another day of slow-boiled domestic tension, and the next, Jenny says she's done. Done with begging for space, dignity, peace, selfhood, done existing as a guest in her own marriage. She didn't say goodbye. She said enough. That's the difference. And it's everything. Now the viewers are spiraling. Comment sections blew up overnight. Is she bluffing? Is Sumit faking surprise again? Is this the end? And more importantly, what the hell triggered this for real? Because when someone finally walks out, it wasn't that day that broke them. This wasn't about one fight. This wasn't even about that awkward breakfast where she was told to keep quiet and smile. No, this was about a mountain of emotional erosion. Silent moments where she stared at the ceiling, knowing nothing was going to change unless she changed it. And she did. She told the camera, flat out, "I can't take it anymore. I won't." Not can't with a question mark. Can't with a full stop. That's not the voice of someone playing for attention. That's the voice of someone ready to evaporate from your narrative and never look back. Jenny didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. She made her marriage her boundary line. And she walked to the other side. Another thing to think about, if leaving shocks a partner more than staying does, what does that say about the dynamic? Because here's what slipped past some viewers in real time. Sumit's face didn't show panic. At first, it showed inconvenience, as if Jenny had messed up the storyline by speaking out of script, as if she owed him a warning, and that tells us everything. He didn't think she'd do it, and she knew he wouldn't stop her. That right there, that's not love. That's learned helplessness sitting in the kitchen and calling it self-adjustment. It was surreal. Off camera, insiders say the argument that day was nuclear. No cameras, no edits. Jenny allegedly broke down, told Sumit she felt invisible, that his silences had become more damaging than his words ever could. That being tiptoed around by his parents was one thing, but being tiptoed around by him, unforgivable. She didn't need him to pick a side. She needed him to pick her, and he couldn't, or wouldn't, or both. Bold retention booster, things don't fall apart overnight. They shatter because you've been pretending the cracks were harmless. Online, reactions were merciless. Team Jenny. Team Sumit. Team, they were never going to make it. But most people agreed on one thing. Something had shifted. Jenny wasn't reacting anymore. She was observing. Emotionally checked out, no longer bargaining. You know how when a person still argues, it means they care? Jenny wasn't even arguing. She was done spending her emotional bandwidth on futility. That's scarier than shouting. The way she walked out of frame, calm, controlled, heartbreaking. And yet some of the viewers still asked, but is she really done? I mean, she's walked away before. She's threatened to leave. Is this different? Yes, because this time, she didn't make it about him. She made it about her. There's no unless you change. No until you talk to them. No timelines, no ultimatums, just an internal alarm finally blaring. Rescue yourself, or no one will. Even Sumit looked stunned, blindsided, like he hadn't seen the signs. But how could he? He was trained not to. Every excuse he's used in the past, cultural expectations, family pressure, timing, failed to explain one thing. Why has her pain never been treated with urgency? And when you realize someone will give you reasons for why you're hurting, but do nothing to stop the hurt, that's when trust dies. Jenny's clarity came like a flash flood. She was speaking plainly, but almost too plainly. No excess emotion. Just a cold, precise truth. This isn't my life anymore. I don't recognize myself in it. And I'm leaving before I forget who I am. Bold retention booster. You know someone's serious when they stop asking for understanding and start packing. Social media blew up within minutes of the clip airing. Some speculated a breakdown. Others claimed a long con setup, but longtime watchers could feel it. This wasn't a twist. This was a slowly burning fire that finally collapsed the foundation underneath it. And you know what we didn't see? Sumit chasing after her. He sat there, barely moving, as if stunned, but not surprised. There's a different pain in watching someone walk out and realizing you trained them to believe you wouldn't follow. So now the question multiplies. What pushed her to the edge? What was the moment? Was it the fight off camera? Or was it the quiet one in her own mind, where she knew she'd never be treated like a family member in that house, no matter how long she smiled? And what about Sumit? Does he actually realize what just happened? Or is he still waiting for an apology? Bold retention booster. When silence becomes more painful than conflict, leaving becomes the only kindness you can give yourself. And here's where it gets messier. Jenny didn't just leave a house. She left a cultural stalemate. A silent referendum about whether she was ever going to be fully accepted, and she voted no. The fight wasn't about a room. It wasn't about dinner. It wasn't about age or accents. It was about dignity. Don't get it twisted. They made her feel like a visitor, even in her own husband's home. They told her to act grateful for being tolerated. You can only wallpaper over rejection with patience for so long before the walls collapse. And when they do, you either rebuild or you leave. She left, and when she left, nobody stopped her. Thunderstorm silence. Now, back in America, where Jenny's staying quiet, no public posts, no live videos, no spicy updates, fans are watching Sumit closely. For the first time, that middle ground between his parents and his wife no longer exists. He spent years balancing on that razor wire, always making sure he never had to fully choose. Now, that act is over. Bold retention booster. When you stop performing peace and start demanding it, people treat your boundaries like betrayal. And those are the exact moments when the real story begins. Here's the suspense you didn't expect. What if this isn't just Jenny saying goodbye? What if it's her finally saying hello to freedom? Hold that thought. Wait until you hear what happened after Jenny stepped onto that plane and never looked back. Jenny thought moving into Sumit's parents' house might be hard, but she had no idea it would be impossible. 1 bedroom, 4 adults, 3 decades of expectation. 1 woman constantly being reminded with smiles, side eyes, and silence that she didn't belong. It started off civil, courteous even. Sada welcomed her in with that mechanical warmth that says, "I've accepted the cameras, not the woman next to my son." Everyone smiled, but no one made room. And at first, Jenny convinced herself this was progress. After all, wasn't this what Sumit had always said he wanted? Unity, peace, a new beginning. Maybe she could win them over. Maybe if she respected their culture, their food, their space, they would start to see her as family. But the tone shifted before the bags were even unpacked. Suddenly, she wasn't a wife anymore. She was a house guest, one being monitored, judged, restricted. Every toothpaste cap left open seemed suspicious. Every moment she sat down was analyzed. Bold retention booster. When a home doesn't give you space to breathe, it stops being a home and starts becoming a performance stage. Jenny didn't get warmth. She got critiques camouflaged as advice. Don't sit like that. Don't use that spoon. Don't talk back, even politely. And if she ever accidentally broke a rule that she didn't even know existed, expect a lecture. Or worse, silence with a sting sharper than words. What hurt most was how fast it escalated. She tried to help with chores like everyone said she should. But each attempt was met with correction, disapproval, or awkward pauses that screamed you're doing it wrong. She wasn't allowed to belong. She was only allowed to behave. Every move became political. Even the bedroom, their only private space, wasn't safe. In theory, it was her reprieve. In reality, it was under quiet surveillance. They'd check in constantly. Doors opened without knocking. Conversations outside the room at all hours. And every object out of place became a reason to remind her, you are not the standard here. She didn't speak the language, and no one made an effort to include her in conversations. Family dinners became bilingual minefields. Hindi jokes flew over her head. Facial expressions replaced words when she asked what was being said, usually followed by, "Oh, it's nothing important," but her gut said otherwise. These weren't cultural barriers anymore. These were calcified lines drawn around comfort zones, with Jenny penned in as the outsider. Sumit? Sumit became the ghost. Not literally. He was there, sitting beside her, laughing with his mom, nodding politely while Jenny slowly shrank into her own shadow. And he'd tell her, it just takes time. Time for what? To be tolerated? He wasn't cruel. That's what made it harder. He made tea, he smiled, he came to bed. But, emotionally, he'd left the room weeks ago. Jenny would speak up. He'd say, I'll talk to them. But when? When? Because every day she felt less like a partner and more like someone visiting a hotel with an unpaid bill. Bold retention booster. The cruelest kind of loneliness is when the person next to you starts feeling further away than people across the world. She started second-guessing everything. Should she not have asked those questions at dinner? Should she have apologized faster the last time Sada got annoyed? Is she imagining this discomfort? But that's what long-term emotional subtlety does. It makes you question your own reality. You start doing mental yoga, trying to understand what exactly you did wrong. And when you ask, the answer is always nothing. Nothing was said directly. No insults. No shouting. Just 1,000 invisible warnings in every interaction. The walls were closing in. Quietly. The routine only made it worse. Morning started with tension. Jenny was awake before anyone else, not because she had to be, but because she couldn't sleep. She'd tiptoe, trying to avoid disturbing anyone, and somehow that effort became just another way to make herself disappear. No one acknowledged it. The weight she carried wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Constant anxiety in her chest, exhaustion in her shoulders, a tension headache that never left, and all she wanted was one moment to be seen. Clearly, honestly, fully. Instead, she got backhanded compliments. Wow, you do know how to sweep. We're surprised you eat Indian food now. Maybe one day you'll start acting like us. It wasn't kindness. It was condescension dressed up as cultural pride. Eventually, Jenny stopped trying to get it right. Because right kept changing depending on everyone else's mood. And she knew, deep down, this wasn't loss of patience. It was loss of self. Bold retention booster, rejection doesn't always arrive as a slam. Sometimes it served as polite disinterest repeated until your spirit gives up. Sumit was the wild card. Sometimes he'd sit beside her and say he understood, that he wanted to fix it, that she meant everything to him. But when it mattered, when Sada would make a dismissive comment, or when Jenny was clearly being frozen out, he'd go quiet. He called it protecting peace. But Jenny called it passing the buck. Peace doesn't mean comfort at any cost. Peace without justice is just compliance. She noticed it once during lunch. She tried to share a story from her past, light, funny, harmless, but mid-sentence she saw Sada roll her eyes. Jenny paused, waited for Sumit to diffuse it. He looked away, took another bite. That moment sat in her like a splinter. It happened again and again, and suddenly every meal felt like she was serving parts of herself for ridicule while her husband wiped the dishes. Where was he emotionally? Nowhere that counted. He wasn't abusive. And that was part of the trap. Everyone was so focused on what he wasn't doing wrong that no one noticed what he wasn't doing at all. He wasn't advocating. He wasn't intervening. He wasn't building a bridge. He was watching Jenny drown and calling it culture. And culture doesn't erase compassion. The saddest part? Jenny still held on. For weeks, she tried different outfits, changed how she phrased things, stayed out of the way, all while shrinking, little by little. But she couldn't shake the reality. She no longer recognized the woman she was becoming. Always cautious, always apologetic, always small. And that's what finally broke her. Bold retention booster. When changing for someone means disappearing completely, you're not evolving, you're ghosting yourself. One night, she looked in the mirror and didn't see herself. The makeup, the clothes, the expressionless stare. It wasn't old age. It was erasure. All for a dream that never materialized. All for maybe someday the family will accept me. But Jenny didn't need acceptance anymore. She needed air. She needed to stop sacrificing her peace in exchange for proximity to a man who never chose her publicly, fully, and unapologetically. And Sumit? He wasn't angry, because that would mean engagement. He was distant, detached. He kept saying things like, "We'll figure it out," but Jenny started to realize he never had a "we" plan. Only a parent's first playbook with her trying to squeeze into the margins. That's not marriage. That's bad outsourcing. She was emotionally evicted, with a smile. And that's Sarah. That's what makes this whole thing so claustrophobic to watch. It's not abuse you can screenshot. It's subtle sabotage. Of faith. Of self-worth. Of identity. Bold retention booster, the most dangerous betrayal isn't loud. It's indifferent. She knew he could change the environment. But he wouldn't. She knew the household politics could be challenged. But they weren't, because saying something meant losing something. And so nothing was said. And Jenny got quieter, until she was no longer there at all. And guess what? That's exactly how they preferred it. At least until she stopped being quiet and packed a suitcase. And Sumit realized she wasn't staying. She wasn't bluffing. And if he wanted to find her, he'd have to go far beyond his comfort zone to get her back. At first, Jenny thought it was her. The miscommunication, the awkward timing, the cultural gap. She kept convincing herself she was reading too much into things, that maybe she needed to be more patient. But time became a slow ache, and patience started looking a lot like low-level emotional manipulation dressed up as adjustment. Every time she opened up about how she felt, the discomfort, the suffocation, the constant pressure, she was met with the same tired phrase. "You're overreacting." And she flinched. Every single time. Not because it was loud, because it was rehearsed. That one line became the poison pill that dragged every painful feeling back into her throat. It didn't matter how long she'd waited to speak or how gently she'd said it. Once those two words dropped, the entire conversation collapsed. And with it, so did she. She started monitoring her own reactions before anyone else could, policing her voice, editing her needs, laughing at things that didn't feel funny, all to avoid being dismissed. That's not peacekeeping. That's psychological exhaustion playing house. Bold retention booster. If someone constantly calls your feelings an overreaction, maybe you're not too sensitive. Maybe they're too unaffected. Her sleep got worse. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, because her brain never shut off. Constantly rehearsing her lines, scanning the family's mood, trying to shape-shift into something that wouldn't trigger that look on Sumit's face. You know the one. Not anger, not love, disappointment, and disinterest. She stopped expecting rescue, stopped asking for clarity, stopped hoping he'd finally speak up or even look concerned when she said, "I'm not okay." And then came the realization. The reason she was always waiting was because he was never planning anything. No deadline, no plan, no timeline for when things would get better. Just vague hope floating on a sea of denial. That's the worst kind of loop, when you keep giving more because the promise was so whispered, so almost believable, that quitting feels like treason. Until one night, Jenny called an old friend, someone who'd known her before the show, before India, before she started shrinking into someone unrecognizable. She told her everything, and when she was done, the line went quiet. Then her friend said just 2 words, and those 2 words flipped the entire script. The morning Jenny left was not a storm. It was still, clean, soundless, no yelling, no dramatic suitcase toss, no door slammed for effect, just packing tape slicing through the air louder than any argument they'd ever had. She had already decided. Not the night before, weeks before. That morning, the decision had matured into action. Her grief wasn't hot anymore. It was cold, organized, and done being rehearsed. She didn't even wait for Sumit to ask what she was doing. She told him mid-sentence, "I'm packing, and I'm leaving." And she kept doing it, kept folding sweaters into tightly rolled bundles, kept taping wires and adapters into plastic bags. Everything methodical, like she was disinfecting her life of emotional clutter. Sumit looked stunned. For a second, he paused as if he'd misheard her. Then came the nervous chuckle, the patronizing "you're not serious" glance, followed by another sentence starting with "we should talk." She didn't wait for the ending, because she'd heard that one before. The sequel to every confrontation they'd ever had: "We should talk. Let's take time. I'll make it up to you." But now, Jenny wasn't interested in rewrites. She was done starring in a story that kept skipping her in the credits. And the irony? Sumit didn't even raise his voice. He didn't block the door. He didn't hold her hand and beg her to explain. He stood in one spot, quietly spinning half-built counter-arguments in his head, trying to catch up emotionally to a decision she made out of emotional necessity. And that, right there, told her she was doing the right thing. Bold retention booster. When someone's silence during your breakdown becomes louder than your pain, leaving isn't rebellion. It's survival. He said her name. Once. Like a question mark. Then again. A little louder this time. But not enough to matter. She didn't cry. Her voice never cracked. Not once. Because tears are for when you have hope. Jenny had none left. She left the bedroom with her bag, the one she had once arrived with, full of dreams and second chances. Now it felt light, hollow, more like a rescue rope than luggage. And as she passed the living room, Sumit finally tried. But not in the way she needed. He asked, "What will my parents think?" Not in anger, in fear. That was the final cut that made everything crystal. It's not what do you think, Jenny. It's always his parents. Their approval. Their comfort. Their reality. His fear of disappointing them was fiercer than any loyalty he'd shown to Jenny's actual sadness. And that's when she gave him the line. Short. Quiet. Lethal. Words that knocked the wind out of whatever storyline they'd been pretending to live in. She tossed it over her shoulder like it wasn't heavy, even though it weighed 10 years of love. She said it once, didn't repeat it, didn't explain, and walked out of frame. Sumit didn't follow. At least, not then. But that line, that final sentence, it would echo in his head for the rest of the season. They didn't see it coming. Not because she didn't warn them. She did, again and again, in whispers, in body language, in silence that screamed louder than words. But people rarely listen to quiet boundaries, not until they explode into action. And now, Jenny was gone. Just gone. And the real fallout was only beginning. Sada was the first to go into damage control mode. Not emotional regret, not accountability. Control, wrapped in concern. She went straight into a what will people say spiral. Talking fast, repeating things like, she's ruining everything. This is not how women behave, as though behavior matters more than burnout. Sumit tried to stay composed, at least on the outside. His first instinct wasn't to reflect, it was to defend, not Jenny, himself. He didn't ask if she was safe. He asked how this would look. Because in his world, drama could be rewritten into misunderstanding. But absence? That's a headline. He told their circle she left during a misunderstanding, that things had escalated, that feelings were running high, that she needed time, as if all of this was sudden. But behind the scenes, we know better. Bold retention booster. When someone's absence feels shocking, it usually means their pain was never taken seriously in the first place. The family meetings were tense, everyone whispering about whose fault it really was, all while pretending it was just another fight. But they knew this wasn't a timeout. Jenny hadn't stormed off. She didn't leave a hotel. She'd crossed the ocean. And she didn't leave a note. Sada spun her version like clockwork. Jenny misunderstood our ways. She wasn't used to our culture. These things take maturity. Translation, it's her fault for not quietly molding herself into their image. But let's talk about guilt, Sarah. Because guilt is not always loud. Sometimes it's planted in phrases that sound caring, but are actually daggers dipped in sugar. You're breaking the family. After everything we did for you, we gave you a chance. Not we never embraced you. Not we failed to make you feel safe. No, it's emotional jujitsu. One person leaves after years of sacrifice, and suddenly the entire family becomes the victim. Online, the reactions split in 3. One group said Jenny overreacted, again, that she should have waited longer, tried harder, as if a decade wasn't enough data. Another group backed her entirely, said the writing was always on the wall, that no woman should have to earn her way into a marriage she's already legally part of. And then there was the third group. The quiet ones. People who started asking the harder question. Why does Sumit get to walk away looking heartbroken? But not accountable? Because to the public, he was heartbroken. He didn't stop her. But he also didn't chase her. And to some people, that looked classy. Respectful. Stoic. But to Jenny, it looked convenient. Let her go. Let her take the blame. Let her carry the weight of walking away so that he could keep the appearance of loyalty without ever having to risk confrontation. He never said, don't go. He didn't say, I'll leave with you. He said, they'll blame me. And that's when you know. This wasn't about love. It was about legacy. Bold retention booster. Some people don't stop you from leaving. Not because they agree, but because it lets them keep their hands clean. Friends say Jenny's been quiet, staying off the radar. No interviews, no long captions, no impulsive live stream therapy sessions. Because this time, she owes nobody closure but herself. And Sumit? Still spiraling, still rephrasing the story depending on who's listening. Sada reportedly asked him to block her. Let her go. Don't chase an ungrateful partner. No one in the family was reportedly pressuring him to make it right. Because making it right would mean admitting what they did wrong. And not one of them is ready for that mirror. The part that stings the most? She's already landed in America. And she hasn't called. Starting over sounds brave when you say it fast. It sounds like a clean page or a fresh chapter. But in real life, it's cardboard boxes, long nights, and figuring out who you even are without the relationship that consumed your world for over a decade. Jenny didn't just leave a house. She didn't just book a flight. She ejected from an ecosystem she'd poured every version of herself into for years. And she did it alone. No fanfare, no lifeline waiting in the US, no fresh condo full of new beginnings furniture. It was her papers, her suitcase, a handful of saved up hope, and a bank account that wasn't built for reinvention at 65. Let's be real, Sarah. Moving across the ocean isn't poetic when your body hurts. When starting over means calling banks, refiling residency records, finding health insurance, looking for housing, and explaining to people at the DMV why your last legal address was on another continent. This wasn't a comeback. This wasn't a glow-up. It was survival. And it's nothing like the show music makes it feel. Jenny wasn't looking for applause. She was chasing quiet. She didn't want a storyline anymore. She wanted peace, a bedtime that didn't come with dread, a shower without glances, a room where she didn't have to earn basic dignity. But peace comes with a price. The jet lag wore off. The adrenaline settled, and then came the mornings where she sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, asked herself what the hell to do next, and realized just how far she'd fallen away from her old self. That's what long-term emotional sacrifice does. It doesn't just bend you in the moment, it disconnects you from the version of you that could once function outside that person. Bold retention booster, starting from scratch doesn't hit hardest in your 20s. It's when you're rebuilding from ruins in your 60s, with no map and no hand to hold. Friends say, Jenny kept mostly to herself during the first few weeks. No selfies, no clickbait captions about being free. It wasn't bitterness. It was a woman reclaiming her energy and choosing where not to put it anymore. No interviews, no tell-alls. Silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because for once she wasn't performing clarity for other people. And then, one day, her phone lit up. A name she hadn't expected. A mutual contact between her and Sumit, someone from the circle, someone neutral. The voice message was short, filtered, careful. But what it said broke her all over again. Apparently, Sumit's been telling people his version. Not just friends, people Jenny knows. The language was soft, gentle, even. She was overwhelmed. She had trouble adjusting. We had a communication gap, but this wasn't supposed to be forever. Jenny hit play on the message again. And again. And all she could think was, of course. Of course the story would be rewritten as a miscommunication. Easier than admitting to 10 years of passive neglect and emotional delay tactics. Easier than admitting to decades of treating discomfort like an act of betrayal. He wasn't angry anymore. He was redefining history while she was still processing the weight of what she finally escaped. Airbrushed. Repackaged. Like none of it happened the way she lived it. Because that's what people do when they want to keep their image intact. They translate scars into misunderstandings. They edit out the parts where they went silent when it counted most. But this time, Jenny wasn't letting it slide. Not because she wanted revenge, because she wanted truth. So she made a plan. Just one answer. One truth bomb. One reply. One time. Then, silence again. Bold retention booster. Sometimes the strongest move isn't revenge, it's breaking the silence with the exact sentence they thought they'd never hear. And as she hit record, we finally saw it. This woman was never dramatic. She was deliberately quiet all these years, but now she's about to speak. And this time, it's not for him. The call wasn't planned. Jenny stared at her screen for hours on and off, opened her contacts, closed it again, poured tea, threw it out, walked into the kitchen, walked out, Then, after the third time checking her Wi-Fi like it held the answer, she hit the button. Sumit picked up. He wasn't angry. He didn't sound defensive. He sounded tired, like someone half hoping it was a dream. Someone surprised the past can stretch into the present even when you try to ignore it. The silence hung between them longer than necessary. Not heavy, just honest. And when Jenny finally spoke, it wasn't for confrontation. She didn't want an apology. She didn't need validation. She just wanted to clarify history before anyone else rewrote it in softer lighting. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, she said. I left because I stopped recognizing myself around you. Sumit didn't interrupt. But his breathing shifted. You know that sound? The almost cry people do when they're swallowing too much at once? That. He said her name. Twice. Then he said, I didn't know you were hurting that much. Jenny's voice didn't crack, but it wasn't cold either. It was calm. Like someone who'd already cried everything out weeks ago, and now just wanted to dry the room. She told him the parts she never said before. How long the anxiety had stretched under her skin. How she stopped asking for change because she realized she'd been begging, not building. And the truth hit both of them in the same quiet moment. She wasn't looking for a different culture. She was looking for a partner. Someone who wouldn't only defend her in private. Someone who wouldn't let family become the fifth wheel in their marriage. Someone who'd choose her publicly, proudly, and with no fine print. Bold retention booster. When a person starts explaining instead of exploding, they're not being kind. They're giving themselves closure. Sumit said he missed her. He said he'd been thinking. He even said, it didn't feel fair. But I don't know how to fix it. And that was the moment Jenny knew. He hasn't changed. He's sorry she left, maybe even genuinely. But sorry doesn't equal different. He still can't say what she needed. Still can't take ownership out loud. Still using soft words to describe a decade of hard silence. So she ended the call herself. She thanked him for picking up. Said she hoped he finds whatever peace looks like in his world. And just before hanging up, she gave him her last word. I'm not coming back. No drama. No shade. Just truth. Jenny didn't leave India. She left the emotional waiting room she'd been sitting in for 10 years, hoping someone would finally see her through clear, unfiltered eyes. And now, she doesn't need to be seen anymore. She sees herself. Cooking again, updating old contacts, laughing at her own jokes, answering only to people who don't need her to audition for decency. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was self-exit. And for anyone who's ever stayed too long in hope, watching this unfold wasn't entertainment. It was revelation. Because at some point, love stops being the anchor and starts being the weight. Jenny let go, and quietly, beautifully, rose. How do you know when it's not cultural anymore? It's control. See you in the next one.